Thank you so much for joining us for our program. It is our final program for Immigrant Heritage Month, and it's our in honor of World Refugee Day. So each year, World Refugee Day is observed on June 20th. We're a couple of days late. It was established by the United Nations in 2001 to mark the 50th anniversary of the 1951 Refugee Convention. The day honors the courage and resilience of those fleeing war and persecution and celebrates the contributions refugees bring to their new home through festivals and other community events. This year, sadly, there's no cause for celebration because there are very few refugees entering the United States at this time, including there are not those who were already approved for entry. And those who have been granted admission are almost exclusively Afrikaners from South Africa who do not meet the criteria for refugee status. Today, we're going to talk about who's considered to be a refugee and asylee, what their legal rights are, and how we can advocate for their safety. So my name is Cathryn Miller-Wilson, and I'm the Executive Director of HIAS Pennsylvania. We're grateful to you for joining us on this, our last Immigrant Heritage Month event of 2026. Joining me today is Shaloo Jose, Managing DOJ Accredited Representative. An accredited representative is a non-attorney whose knowledge and experience allows them to be authorized by the U.S. Department of Justice to provide certain immigration legal services. And actually, I misspoke because Shaloo is, in fact, an attorney. She's an attorney in her country of origin, but she has not taken the American bar exam. She is nevertheless authorized by the Department of Justice to provide certain immigration legal services. Shaloo runs a program that works exclusively with refugees and asylees after they've been here for at least a year. She helps them to adjust their status from refugee, asylee to permanent resident. She also helps them renew their work authorization, petition for family members, etc. She's been doing this work for almost 20 years and has gained during that time extensive expertise in refugee and asylum policies in the United States. If you have any questions during the discussion, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. To open the Q&A, click on the More option at the bottom of your screen, and it should open a menu with Q&A as one of the options. We receive a lot of questions during our webinars, so we'll get to as many as we can during the program. So welcome, Shaloo. Let's start with a few basics. What is a refugee, and what is the difference between a refugee and an asylee?
So first of all, thank you, Kathy, for having me here and giving me this opportunity to speak here about refugees and what our clients are going through. So a textbook definition for refugee and asylee is the same. These are people who are fleeing their home country because of any persecution based on their race, religion, nationality, or an affiliation to a particular social group. The main difference is where they apply for this status, right? So for refugees, it's primarily the processing of their paperwork happens overseas, in a country where they are, temporarily situated, and there's an office that kind of processes all these paperwork. For asylees, it could happen at different places. It could be either once they've arrived into the United States and they're applying for asylum because certain situations, country conditions have changed after they arrived, or they can apply for their status at the border. So that's where it is.
So what kind of security investigations do refugees and asylees undergo, or did they undergo in the past?
So for refugees and asylees, they have to undergo extensive background checks. I'll start with refugees. When a person applies for a refugee status and is requesting that they are given protection, they have to register with UNHCR. They have to do fingerprints, interviews, medical exams, and this can take a long time. We're not talking about just a month or two. It could take years and years. Clients have been living in these refugee camps for maybe almost 10 years before they if we've seen some clients who stayed there for such a long time. And during that time, again, they're going through multiple levels of interviews, background checks, and then at the end, an extensive medical exam before they come to the United States. People who are seeking asylum, again, the same process. They have to fill out an application. Again, go through a lot of interviews, background checks. It's not easy. Again, this also can take many years. Asylum cases are not adjudicated, at that moment. It takes several years, months for it to get processed. So, yeah.
Okay, great. And I'm just putting in the chat, you referenced UN CHR.
UNHCR, yes.
Sorry, UNHCR, UN Commission on Human Rights.
Yes, that processes the refugee paperwork.
Right. All right. We have a question in the chat. Are the children of refugees automatically classified as refugees?
Yes, they are. They're considered as derivative. If they're, either they are considered as a part of the family if they're coming in all together, or if a refugee first arrives in the United States and then petitions for them, they are considered as someone who has derived the refugee status.
Okay, great. Now, as children, though, they still have to go through the security vetting that you described, right?
Yes. They also have to go through a security vetting.
Okay. Are the definitions and security vetting processes that you just talked about something that are part of federal law, or are they things that the president can decide?
So the background checks have always been there, right, from the beginning, and they're part of the federal laws. But policies, how these there are certain policies that the government, the administration, which is in power, can definitely influence and can create backlogs and add additional vetting and security checks if needed, which are already in place, but kind of making it even more stringent and having these travel bans, which is now in place for many countries, and that again prevents people from coming into the country. So it's a mix.
Okay, great. Once you're granted refugee status or given asylum, what are your rights? Can you work? Can you petition for family members? Can you easily return to the United States if you travel abroad? Can you get a driver's license? Are you eligible for food stamps, cash assistance, or government-funded health care?
So once someone's been granted refugee or asylum status, they can legally work here in the country. They're authorized to work. They're allowed to apply for social security number. They can get a driver's license. Again, it depends on the state laws also as to what are the criteria on getting this driver's license and state IDs. For public benefits, again, the policies have changed. Refugees and asylees were eligible to receive some of the public benefits, but now that's been taken away. Again, that was also dependent on if you were only eligible based on your income, not if a refugee or asylee was working and they were earning well, they did not qualify for the public benefit. They can petition for certain family members like spouses and children who are below the age of 21, unmarried kids, and then traveling overseas. They definitely cannot go back to their home country. They cannot get a passport, which means that they have to rely on a document that's issued by the U.S. U.S. government, which is called like a refugee travel document. They are required to have that before they travel overseas. Again, they have to make sure to the country that they're traveling to that these refugee travel documents or re-entry permits are accepted by these countries. Every time they come back, there's a clear security check that they have to go through at the CBP, at the airports, making sure that they're still eligible to enter. And as I said, they cannot go back to their home country because that can leads to raising questions as to whether the claim was genuine or not.
Okay, great. In addition to the rights that refugees and asylees have, what are the obligations once they receive that status? What are their obligations?
So, of course, they have to follow all the US laws. They have to be a good citizen like any other US citizens. They have to pay their taxes. The only thing that they cannot do is, they cannot vote or register to vote. That is not until they become a US citizen. They're required to keep all the immigration documents current and carry with them all the time, so that in case if they have to prove who they are, the immigration status, they have to have it with them all at, all the time. Then if they move, change of addresses, they have to make sure that every time they move, they have to kind of update their addresses with the US immigration within 10 days. They have to do that. And then once a refugee and asylee has been granted their status, they're required to, refugees it is mandatory for them to apply for what is called a green card, which is a lawful permanent resident status within a year of their arrival. And asylees also are allowed to adjust their status and to become a lawful permanent resident of the US.
Okay, great. So now let's talk a little bit about what has changed for refugees and asylees since January 20th, 2025. Are the processes for entering the country different?
A lot has changed, right? It's not easy anymore. Definitely with the first major policy change that happened was the pause on refugee processing overseas. All clients, even who had their paperwork ready, just needed a stamp on the passport to travel, board the flight, their paperwork were all stopped. There are no refugees, except for a few exceptions. No more refugees are entering the country. Even family members of these refugee clients are not allowed to enter the United States because of the new policy of the travel ban countries that they have come. Additional vetting is going on. Applications that had been filed to change of status to apply for lawful permanent residence status, right? These cases are taking a longer time because of the administration has asked for additional, vetting, background checks on them, being scheduled for biometrics again. And these cases were already pending. These are not like, I'm now talking about cases that are pending for a year. These cases have been pending for years and years, on the grounds of the fact that they were doing background checks. And again, with this, it's getting even more and more delayed. Work authorization cards. The recent policies have stopped automatic renewals of our work authorization cards, which clients cannot, even if they file it on time, they're not getting their work permit cards renewed, which means that there's a disruption in their jobs. They cannot work. Just in general, everything has, there was a backlog, and with these additional, checks, it has clogged the system, I would say. And especially for a lot of refugees and asylees, we would say, they had a petition for family members overseas, and these cases are no longer, getting processed overseas, even though we are saying that these bans should not be implemented on these clients, because these clients are seeking to come to the United States on humanitarian grounds. They are still not being allowed to come to the United States. Especially, I want to talk about Afghan clients. These clients had petitioned for their family members. They are left behind, and they're no longer getting their paperwork approved to come to the United States. And I think somebody mentioned on the chat, people who have their green cards, even those cases, reopening of those cases, have creates a lot. So there's a lot of uncertainty right?
Right,
Yes,
right.
I have my lawful permanent resident status. Will that be an issue? Even U.S. citizens, right? Those are getting.
Yeah.
We understand there's a level of security, background check security and all, but it needs to be fair and just is what the clients are asking for. They're like, okay, how long should I be waiting? How long? And unfortunately, we don't have answers for that.
Yeah.
And these policies are changing. Sorry, just to Kathy, just to kind of add to
Right.
the whole
Uh,
chaos. These policies are changing on a day-to-day basis. So
right.
I'm so careful when I'm talking to my client, like, as of today, 12/19, this is the policy. I don't know, if it
If it's
will
going to
change
change tomorrow. Right, right.
or in the next hour.
Yeah, yeah, or in the next hour. No, that's fair. I think too, I just want to highlight a couple of things. One, and I know this was just said offhand, but to be very, very clear, it was not easy before January 20th, 2025,
Yes.
correct? I
Yes,
mean,
yes, definitely. As I said,
right.
there was a backlog,
Hmm.
already a backlog.
Hmm.
COVID had kind of pushed a lot of things, on the back burner. And things were, clients, people were not coming because of COVID. Then
Right,
there was a small risk. But again, it was already choked up.
right, right,
And then
right,
this
right,
happened. Then
right,
so
right.
it's I it's so hard to kind of tell clients how long should they be waiting to get an answer.
Yeah.
That's frustrating.
Yeah. And I think it's really important. I want to highlight what you said about petitions for family members either not being processed at all or the extreme delays. I mean, it's just another form of family separation. And it's important that people understand that, that these are people that have been persecuted, some of them tortured and fled. And they make it to the United States thinking that their family will be with them,
Right,
and literally years pass
right.
um, without being able to be with their family, which is a terrible thing to contemplate, especially when you've been already traumatized because of what's happened in your home country. Um, I also want to highlight another injustice that a questioner brought up in the questions. If it's mandatory for refugees to apply for a green card, do they have to pay for the application to apply for a green card?
So for refugees, fortunately, they don't have to pay to apply
Hmm.
for the green card. So it's free.
Hmm.
However, it can take years and years for it to actually see the green card in hand,
Right.
which means that, again, that anxiety and the fear as to what's going to happen. Why am I not getting an answer? Why can't they schedule an interview? What's the background check? I just did all my background checks before coming to the United States. Agreed. And
Hmm.
they're like, okay, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years is what I have to wait. But unfortunately, we don't have an answer to, like, how long do they have to wait to actually get their green card.
Right. And in terms of fees, while it's true that a refugee doesn't have to pay for a green card, because of HR1, which passed last July, for the first time in the history of the United States, asylum seekers have to pay a filing fee to apply for asylum. And
Mhm.
not only do they have to pay that one-time fee, but they have to pay it every single year that their petition is pending, even though the reason it's pending is because the US government hasn't processed it yet.
Right, 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 right.
So it's
Now, and
stunning in its outrageousness.
it's and we talk about, yes, the fees for refugees, they don't have to pay any fees. However, for
Mhm.
asylees, if they're applying for a lawful permanent resident status, right, remember, we have to remember there are two separate different categories, right?
Mhm.
For asylees, they have to pay a fees, and the fees is $1,450, right? So if
Right.
it's a big family, and it can only be waived if you're receiving certain benefits, which, again, with the
Mhm.
new policy change, they no longer are eligible to receive these services, the public benefits, um, or it's income based. If not, they have to pay the full fees. The only fees that a refugee would be required to pay in this process when they're adjusting the status is the medical fees. To pay, they have to pay a civil surgeon to do, they have to again do a medical exam in the United States while applying for the lawful permanent status is, that fee cannot be waived, and that is also not covered under insurance. So, it could be a decent, clients end up paying $150 for these, these medical records just to be completed by civil surgeon.
Yeah. So that is something that refugees and asylees have to pay for.
Asylees have to pay even more because they're required to do a complete medical exam because they have not done that medical process overseas. Because remember, refugees do before arriving to the United States have completed the whole medical, so they have some records. But for asylees, that's not the case. That's why they have to do a full medical exam, which includes vaccine and other physical exams. And it's even more. Clients have paid $700 to $800 just out of pocket, in addition to their fees. To get those medical exams done. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you. One sliver of good news, I just want to inform our listeners. Last week, a federal court determined that the travel ban was arbitrary and capricious, and had to be immediately stopped, which part of their order was to begin processing the applications that had been stopped because of the countries, people from those countries that were on the travel ban list. While that is excellent news, as is fairly predictable at this point, the administration has appealed that order. So we remain with bated breath to see what will happen in the interim and both at the Supreme Court level. Okay, so question in the chat: if an asylee has appropriate documents, the attendee used the term I-94, but I just want to remind our listeners that not everybody is an immigration attorney, so we don't want to use the form numbers because people don't know what those necessarily mean. But if an asylee has the appropriate forms, is it necessary for them to also have work authorization and travel documents?
Yeah, so the I-94, just to kind of explain to other people who don't know what an I-94 is, it's like a card that is given by USCIS, which is the immigration office, which has a stamp, which of that they've been granted an asylum status or a refugee status. For refugees, it's different. It looks a little different. For asylees, it looks a little different. Right. But yeah, so if they have that document, they're, as I said, refugees and asylees are authorized to work. Their status allows them to work, even if they don't have to get a work authorization card. Okay. And they still need a travel document because if they're traveling overseas, since they cannot get a passport, the US government gives them what is called a refugee travel document, which looks exactly like a passport, and it's in lieu of their of a passport from their country. So they're not allowed to renew or obtain a passport. So, but I just want to go back on the work authorization cards. Up until like a few years ago, we would tell our clients, refugees and asylees, oh, you do not need your work authorization. You don't have to renew your work authorization card because, at least in the state of Pennsylvania, our clients can get their state IDs, even if their work authorization card is expired. They can use that as a form of ID to get the state ID renewed. However, with the new changes and this new real ID coming into place, that's not the case anymore. In order for the client to get the real ID, they need a valid work authorization card or a valid passport, which they can't get. And if a client now has a real ID, our concern is if they go back to get those documents renewed. They will not be able to do it if they don't have the work authorization document anymore. So they can continue working if they have the regular state ID, I-94, and a social security card, which is unrestricted. If they have these three documents, it fulfills the I-9 eligibility, employment verification requirements. But if they now have procured, most of them have, right, the real ID because they want to domestically travel within the United States. Our fear is they will not be able to do it if they don't have a work authorization card. So we are now encouraging clients to apply for work authorization cards. Again, when will they get it? Don't know, but at least we are applying for those. Yeah.
Great. All right. Now there's a question in the chat that I want to talk about specifically about the Afghans who came in right after the Taliban seized power. The question is whether they were considered refugees if they came in as parolees. And there's a lot in that question to unpack. But before we dive into the answer, which as we answer the question, you will feel frustrated on behalf of Afghans. Our immigration laws are so messed up that we kind of tortured ourselves in an effort to try to let the Afghans in. So let me explain what I mean. So the question was about whether they were considered refugees if they came in as parolees. So the first problem is the process that Shaloo described about becoming a refugee. So normally you flee your country of origin, which of course the Afghans did, and you go to a third country, not the United States. And in that third country, you're designated as a refugee if you meet the legal criteria, and then you go through the extensive, and when I say extensive, I mean 10-step, years-long security vetting process. So what happened with the Afghans is because it was, to a large extent, our fault, what happened, President Biden wanted to make sure that the Afghans weren't stuck in third-party countries, waiting years and years to come in. So he wanted the Afghans to be able to be airlifted to the United States, much like the Vietnamese were at the close of the Vietnamese War. However, the big difference is that the Vietnamese came in the 1970s before there was a refugee resettlement process that was passed by Congress in the United States. Now there's a process, and the process says, among other things, that you have to go through this extensive vetting. So Biden came up with this solution where he said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to parole the Afghans into the country, which means that they are legally allowed to be here. But we're going to parole them to these military bases, not to the country at large. In the military bases, they will be vetted in a kind of expedited way so that they can then be permitted to leave the military base and begin to be resettled in the United States. So that's what he did. But then Congress insisted that the Afghans, once they went through this vetting process and were resettled by refugee resettlement agencies, they then had to, which threw a wrench into the whole thing. They thought that it was okay because they put into the act that the asylum process for Afghans would be expedited and would only take a month or so. But in fact, that did not happen. We filed something like 120 asylum applications on behalf of the Afghans that we resettled, and it took longer than a year to get those asylum applications processed. Not only did it take longer than a year, but in fact, the temporary protected status that they had been given expired during the time that they were waiting for the asylum application. So in order to not be deported, our attorneys were forced to refile a renewal of the temporary status, which took an enormous amount of time. Additionally, going through the asylum process meant that they had to prove in a court of law that they were, in fact, persecuted by their government. So the Afghan folks who had come in fleeing the Taliban were questioned about things like, do you have a police report to prove that you were persecuted? Well, the Taliban are the police. So there was no possible way to get a police report from Afghanistan to prove that they were persecuted. Ultimately, we were able to help our clients overcome these barriers, and they did eventually get asylum. But as you can see, the process was messed up, to say the least, from beginning to end. And those family members that didn't make it onto the planes, we had to petition for them, and many of them are still stuck in Qatar or other places around the world trying to get permission to enter the United States because the processing took so long that now there's a new president, and Shaloo just described to you the processes that have changed. And so Afghan families have been separated, many of them, since they've come here. And they're very upset, which is understandable. So Shaloo, I don't know if you want to add anything to that answer, but
No, I think Kathy, as you said, you covered it all, but it's just like, for me, it's, on a daily basis, we hear from these clients, has anything changed? Has anything changed? And these clients have, their wives are old in Afghanistan, the kids are old in Afghanistan, and, they send me these messages, the news that's happening every day, and they're like, my wife is at risk, I am here. She's single. She cannot travel outside, even because of the U.S. embassies. Since there's no U.S. embassy in Afghanistan, we had a client who just right before, a few months before all of this, this new policy came in, between Jan 25 and like 6 months into that, we were trying to get their interviews scheduled in a third country. They somehow got their, the wives out of there, out of Afghanistan. They went to a third country. They did the interview. Interview was completed. All they had to do was to get that stamp on the passport, and the ban happened, and then they could not travel. Now, for them, now my client was like, how am I going to get my wife back to Afghanistan? Because now they know that, she's left and now she's coming back. You know, it's a constant worry that our clients have to live. And, you know, I can
yeah,
only, as a mom, as a parent, I can only imagine, one cannot imagine the amount of pain that our clients have to go through on a daily basis, just worrying about, their family members. And they're like, what have we done? What did we do? We were helping this government. We were doing the right thing. Why are we being, punished like this? So it's hard to get those, give them those answers. But, all I do is just listen and, kind of.
yeah. And I think one other thing to note for our listeners, because this whole process is so confusing, for the Afghans who didn't make it to the military bases in the United States and ended up in Qatar or one of the other countries across the world who initially said that they would receive Afghans, um, those countries all had in place temporary policies.
Right.
So I know that I've heard, and I'm sure that Shaloo has as
Mhm.
well, anguish from our clients that are here who are trying to get their family members here, that not only are they upset about not getting their family members, but they're also now terrified that their family members are going to get deported back to Afghanistan from those countries where they sought temporary shelter. And so just that's something else to keep in mind. So it's definitely a worldwide problem, which sadly, in this moment, the United States is not helping and is causing additional harm. Um, so, um, so The next question I have, and I guess we've talked about some of them, but I wondered if you could share a story of one of your clients, and how they've been impacted by the changes in policy.
So, one of the ones that comes right to mind, because again, I spoke to this client in the morning today, is a client who had, he's a refugee, had petitioned for his family members and waited almost like 7 years for it to just get to the US Embassy overseas. They had their first the interviews in January 2024. And then all they had to get was the stamp on the passport. And we were like in constant touch with the embassy. Okay, what do you else need? Do you need anything else for this application to get processed? What do you need? What do you need? There was silence. They did not respond to anything. And we reached out to the senator's office. They were contacting, and again, he was like, oh, it'll come. Then in mid-August 24, around in August 2024, we said, oh, medical exemption. Okay, it need to be updated now because it's expired. We got that done. And then it just kept dragging. And come January 2025, there was a ban. This whole process was paused. And you wouldn't believe it, that day I get an email from the embassy that we cannot process your application anymore. And I'm like, really, you really waited for this day to respond to all my inquiries, right? And it's the client is like, oh, I've waited so many years. I cannot go back because he's in the process of applying for his citizenship, but he still cannot go back, right? There's a risk. There's a reason why he sought a refugee status from that country. He cannot go back. So he's frustrated. He asked me to write an email to the embassy, but I like, okay, yes, I will write, but there's no response. I'm not going to get any response from them. We've had cases that for Afghan nationals that were suddenly was approved. We get an approval letter in the mail, and suddenly just a day later we get a notice that it's being reopened. What reason? I don't even have that reason till today. I have many Afghan clients who petitioned for their family members overseas. As I said, they did their best to get their families out, like they went to the neighboring countries we got visas, and they're still waiting there. But as you said, Kathy, these countries are no longer are asking these clients to go back, and it's a big risk for them to go back. We have so many of such cases which are there. And these clients are like, my wife is depressed, my mom is depressed, I haven't seen my mom for so many years, she's sick, I cannot go back. I cannot ask my clients to go back to
Right.
their mom, and especially, in countries where it's such a high risk. Even if they
Right.
have their green cards, cannot go back, cannot even travel outside, I'm at a point where, yes, you could travel to a third country, but what if a policy changes?
Right. Right.
So
So
I'm
that's
like,
the
I
problem.
cannot guarantee anything at this point. So they're
Right.
stuck. We have
Right.
clients who are like, I have a client who's been waiting for his green card for almost like 7 years now. And before coming to the United States, he was in a camp in Nauru. We've had many clients come in from there, and he was like, I was 13 years in that camp, right? Then he comes here and he's like, even though I'm free, I'm not in a prison or anything, but this is equivalent to a prison, right? Because he hasn't seen his kids. They're all
Right.
grown up. He's like, I don't think even my kids recognize me. He's petitioned for them, right? But processing has been paused. It was delayed and then paused. So
Right.
this client is frustrated, right?
Right.
Every 3 months, 6 months, we write to US immigration, asking them for an update. We get a standard answer back. We've requested the senator's office, who've been really helpful, and they've been contacting them. Again, get the same response, but there's no solution.
Right.
This whole
Right.
problem. It's just they're like, what did we do? Doesn't seem fair to us.
Right. Right.
Not a fair system.
Yeah,
That's
it's
what it is.
definitely not a fair system. And I think it's a good segue. One of our listeners asked about how are US immigration policies and asylum policies different from those in other countries like Canada and Europe. Um, and the honest answer is we don't know. I mean, we practice American immigration law, not Canadian or European immigration law. So I can't tell you the details. What I can say, though, is just simply by reading the headlines, is that sadly, America, the United States seems to remain a leader, even when it's leading in bad policy. So there's been a lot of headlines about changes in German, in British, in Canadian even policies uh, being more exclusive. Um, and I think that is happening for a lot of reasons. One reason is because the number of displaced people in the world is larger than it's ever been, although very, very recently it's gotten slightly smaller. But it's still, for the most part, larger than it's ever been. And so countries are reacting and saying there's too many immigrants and we can't handle them. But another big, big reason is because the United States, which has been a leader in the critical importance of taking in people who need help, has, of course, quite loudly and vociferously slammed that door and said, we're not going to do that anymore. And so by throwing that leadership away, it's given other countries permission to kind of shamelessly also slam their doors. But I do think there's something very important, and here I'm going to turn it back over to Shaloo, but the United States is not and has never been like other countries. We, as we say, are a nation of immigrants. And we certainly have exceptions. There are indigenous North Americans who we have treated badly is the understatement of the world. There are slaves who we forced to come here. But putting that aside, our strength, our power, our success has always been about the fact that that to be an American is to be in large part from somewhere else. Um, and so for us to turn our backs is much more serious than I think it is for other countries who have different histories. And so with that, Shaloo, I want to ask you, why do you think it's important for the United States to continue to welcome asylum seekers? And what do you say to people who say, well, there's not enough room?
Yeah, no, I would say what I would start is like no one wants to leave their home, right?
Mhm.
Because that's where you feel safe the most. However, you have to leave when certain things change, when you no longer are feeling safe in that space. And most of our clients that we serve at HIAS Pennsylvania, refugees and asylees, are fleeing because of war, persecution, ethnic conflict, and other situations. They no longer feel safe. And I think that's where we all started, like all, if there's someone in our families, who no longer felt safe and took that step and came to the United States, and they were welcomed. They were given that opportunity to rebuild their lives. So if we were given that opportunity, why not the others who are coming in right now? Right? I understand security and concerns are always there. And all these people who are coming and asking for refuge or asylum are ready to go through that screening process. They are not saying no to that, but it needs to be there needs to be a certain process. It needs to be justified. It cannot just be like, okay, one day I feel like this, tomorrow I feel like that, and the day after tomorrow I feel like that. And it could take forever. Doesn't make sense, right? Because you're living in this constant fear, and that's the fear you were wanting to escape from that country, right? And we can all see that all so many of our immigrants who have come here have established big companies, have contributed to the society, and they always give back, right? So I think and we have this long tradition, our country has a long tradition of protecting, offering protection, welcoming refugees and asylees. It's a part of our history, right? Why are we stopping now, right? What made us to rethink, if if somebody would have thought about that many years ago, you and I wouldn't be here, right? So why now? Why are we rethinking now? Because why doesn't hurt me anymore? Because I'm not the one who's affected. So I think we need to rethink on that policy. People still need, you know, they're coming in for a reason, not just because, oh, I want to go. They're coming in for a reason, and they are asking for help. And we've always offered that help to people. I would just say, let's become human beings, not think with people with a heart. That's why I think it's important.
Yeah, no, that's great. So the last several questions we got are related to the hope part of our program, if I can say that there is a hope. So I'll start with, what are you seeing in terms of immigration legal services capacity? And of course, I can answer that question, and Shaloo, you can, chime in. Excuse me. Immigration legal services capacity in general and specifically to our agency is quite low. There's a couple of reasons for that. The need obviously has far exceeded what anybody could provide. But the other reason, which kind of gets back to the advocacy portion, is because our immigration laws are so messed up. So when I say so messed up, what do I mean? I mean the fact, as Shaloo has already discussed, that things take so long. So while things are working their way through the system, our staff and other staff of other agencies are continuing to work with clients as they have questions, as they get served with papers about questions that they have to respond to, as they go through life changes, right? Maybe when we started representing them, they were married and now they're divorced. And so that can change. We'll have to file more papers about that fact. Or maybe they were single and now they're married, etc. So the length of time that these cases take really inhibits capacity. So what can we do to help ensure immigrants in Pennsylvania have access to free or affordable counsel? Two things. One, you can advocate with your legislators to deal with the backlog, to get Congress to order to appropriate funding, instead of appropriate funding to the deportation force, which they clearly seem fond of doing. They should be appropriating funding to have real qualified immigration judges and immigration process folks. So not judges, but people at the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service, who are in charge of accepting all the filings, reviewing them, and moving them forward. So that's something that you can advocate for. The second way to help ensure immigrants have access is by donating to us. So just to be selfish, the more money that we raise, the more cases that we can handle. So there are in the chat ways to donate to us. And you can also donate to many of the other fabulous immigration legal services agencies in the city or in the state. That if you Google immigration legal services, you'll come up with a list. And they're all really great. We work collaboratively with them to try to help with capacity. So the other advocacy question that I want to take back to Shaloo is, what reforms do you think would improve efficiency and fairness? And while also maintaining strong security standards. And I want to ask you that question so that then we can go back and say, these are the things that you should advocate with Congress for. So go ahead, Shaloo. What reforms do you think would be great?
Um, I would say, you know, hiring more immigration officers to kind of, you know, process cases, because at this point, like, all the focus is on detaining people and sending them back, whereas we have a big backlog of applications right here, and they are just waiting on like what security checks and all of that's going to use technology, right? We have great technology these days. Use that, you know, to run your background checks in a more efficient way and more quicker. You get the responses quicker, right? Yes or no. Clients no. Okay, whether can I stay here or can I cannot, right? Processing of getting trained immigration officers, judges, right, in places so that they can process these applications, you know, quickly and in a more fair way. Um, I think as someone who's actively working with clients, you know, these are the things that are from my end. I would say, okay, why can't you get that thing done? You know, get us answers quickly so that we can take the next steps, and the clients can move on. Because and I think there's another question about like mandamus is coming up a lot. Yes, you know, that is an option, but with this administration, clients are so scared to even, you know, go against the government. We tell them, yes, go ahead and fight, you know, let's file this. The clients are like, oh, will that affect my case? Will that affect my case? You know, will that lead to you know, a denial in my case because I forced the government to take? It should not, right? That fear should not. You know, these systems have been put in place so that the government takes its action and makes a decision on time. We should not be, and clients should not be punished for, but they have lost that trust at this given point. They're so nervous. They're so nervous to just even challenge the government at this point. They're like, it's going to backfire on me, even though there's nothing. You know, they should be good to do all of that. So from my end, I would say, you know, using, you know, having these things more, you know, it should be consistent, and, you know, using technology to clear out your backlogs and things like that. And, you know, just don't have policies, you know, just out of the blue, right? We cannot have unthought of, you know, policies that are not thought through. You know, it can create a lot of like, we have a policy that was announced Friday afternoon, Memorial Day weekend, right? It created so much tension. You know, these things were not even announced. We were not even allowed to even comment on those policies. So you see how arbitrary these things are coming up just out of nowhere. It creates a lot of fear. These things should not be happening. So I think that's what we should be, you know, doing.
Yeah.
And you know, security, yes, everybody agrees we need to have security checks in place, but there is a
But the
certain
truth,
yeah.
right. I mean, the truth is we already have those systems in
Yes,
place. So
yes, yes.
that's part of the problem is that it's easy to create fear when you're lying.
Right.
So, if you make up a statement about how there's no security, then people get upset, but that's in fact not the truth.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah, 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 yeah. All right. So sadly, we've run out of time, but we're so appreciative. First of all, I want to thank you, Shaloo. It was really, really
Um,
great for participation. And thank you to our audience. There were a lot of questions that we weren't able to get to. Some of them were very specific, and I urge you to call our intake line, which we'll put in the chat, and we can try to help. But for those of you who we didn't get to your questions, hopefully you'll find answers on our website. While the changes you heard today may have made you angry, I know they make me very angry. We hope you've also been inspired to advocate for change. The recording of this program and the previous programs in our Immigrant Heritage Month series will be added to HIAS Pennsylvania's YouTube channel and on our website, www.hiaspa.org. There are many ways that you can make your voice heard. Contact your congressional representative and demand that actual refugees, not the president's choice of people, be let into the country. Demand reforms to the asylum seeking process, including improving the adjudication process and ensuring due process, which means a hearing and an opportunity to be heard. Demand immigration reform that results in a system of inclusion, not exclusion. Because what we've experienced over the last 250 years of our country is how critical immigrants are to our nation. In addition, you can spread the facts about who refugees and asylees are and why it's important and a foundational American value that we welcome them. You can do this by posting those facts on social media, writing letters to your local newspaper containing those facts, and sharing what you have learned today with your family, neighbors, and colleagues. This is so critically important as lies continue to permeate from the administration on down. You can also volunteer with us and donate. Both opportunities are available at our website on www.hiaspa.org. Thank you so much for tuning in. Take care.